I'd be hard pressed right now to think of a group of people who is more challenged by all the change that is swirling around us at the moment than consumers. If you think about it, they're navigating changes at work, they're navigating changes with home and with family, and at the same time, they're trying to figure out how to be consumers in a very different way, how to continue to decide which brands to stay connected to and which businesses to buy from, when all the means that they normally have at their disposal to make those choices and to engage with those brands have changed dramatically. I can't help but think that part of understanding how to connect to these consumers right now requires us to dig deeper into how their thinking is changed by COVID-19, and in particular how they've changed during this period that we're calling the cautious commerce phase of the pandemic, as they try to find out what it means to be a consumer in a very different way. Fortunately for me, when I'm trying to understand human behavior better, I have a colleague that I can turn to. Her name is Dr. Laurel Newman, and she's a social and personality psychologist who is on staff at Merits with our behavior science and innovation team. And so I recently asked her to engage in a conversation with me about two really important groups of people that we all want to connect to right now: our employees and our best customers. In part one of our conversation, we talked about employees and how important it is to understand their mindset. And now we're going to talk about customers and what it is that we need to understand better about them, and in particular, what is driving their loyalty to brands in a time where so much disruption is occurring in their lives. So please, join us for the conversation. So Laurel, in the first part of this conversation you and I have been having, we really focused on employees and how companies should be thinking about engaging with them in this period that we're referring to now as the phase of cautious commerce. The second phase of this pandemic we've all been experiencing, where we're starting to see companies trying to figure out how to rebuild and to re-enter the marketplace as consumers are trying to make the same decisions and choices. How do you get back out and become a consumer? How do you engage again? And we definitely see that happening in fits and starts, and we think that's going to be going on for a while. So it's going to be really critical in this period to be thinking about what is the mindset of employees and customers during this time period, and how really to react to them and to engage with them in a way that is meaningful. And I know part of why we work together at Merits and we have a behavioral science discipline is because of how critical it is to have a serious application of behavior science to your business and your business challenges, not just a tactical one.
A lot of companies just go straight into how do we nudge specific behaviors, and that's really important to do, and there are some things we can do to increase the probability of specific desired behaviors, but we really try to go kind of beyond those nudge principles and think about people's motives, their needs, maybe their vulnerabilities, where they are psychologically. And so that's kind of what this conversation is about with respect to employees earlier and now customers.
Yes, so let's talk about customers, because this is definitely my favorite topic. I have a phrase that I've used for a long time as I think about how to engage customers, particularly around this idea of loyalty, which is that customers or consumers are human beings first. And it's really that acknowledgement that if you don't understand what makes humans tick, what drives their decision making, it's really hard to engage with them in the marketplace. So that's why I was really excited to think about the formula and the idea that you had for how to engage with employees, because it does feel like it probably applies to customers as well.
So yeah, I mean, the first thing we talked about with respect to what's probably on employees' minds right now is safety is a really big thing, something we used to take for granted, and now we can't. So, I know as people are transitioning physically back to the workplace, that's going to be really on people's minds. Do you think that's something that customers are thinking about right now too?
Yeah, there's no doubt they are. And I think probably in most areas of the marketplace, if it involves any kind of transaction where you have to leave your house, safety is on your mind. Now, it might be a low threshold of concern, or for others, it might be overwhelming. But I think there's no question that if you're thinking about getting on an airplane, going to a hotel, entering a grocery store, certainly going into a restaurant right now, you've got consumers saying, is that safe? And what I think is really interesting about that from a brand connection standpoint is that has almost never been a consideration for a consumer. short of maybe going to one of these places today, you know, where they let you take a drink and then throw axes at a
Yeah.
target. Like you're not thinking about safety
Right.
when you engage as a consumer. And yet now, maybe for the first time for people, that's the core concern they have. And I wonder, you know, I go back to maybe the most basic psychology, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it seems like, man, if I'm not dealing with that first and making you feel like, yes, this is a safe place to be or to interact, then I really can't have, it seems like, any other messaging going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with Maslow. You know, safety is at the bottom, but underneath safety is physiological needs is the very bottom. So physiological needs and safety. And I think physical safety is right now where a lot of people's focus is. But physiological needs too, you know, are something that, like in the employee space, do I have a job? Do I have healthcare insurance? You know, so you can kind of bundle those two together, like safety and physiological needs are kind of interwoven, you know. Is that something that do you think that customers are thinking about physiological needs and basic necessities like that as part of the way that they engage with a brand?
I think they are. And I think at the same time, they are responding positively to the businesses saying, we are trying to adjust. We're trying to do something different. I think probably all over the country, one of the ways we've seen that is restaurants trying to survive by going to curbside pickup. That's not how we're used to interacting with restaurants, maybe with fast food, but not with normal restaurants. And so that adaptation is looked at positively, like you're trying to do something different. It's possible that will also be effective with the different types of business they're saying we're amping up our cleaning efforts. Although with lack of information, I'm not sure we know what the right cleaning efforts are yet. So if that'll be as effective, but I do think consumers are responding positively to that.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about on our team about kind of the difference between real safety and perceived safety, and how, you know, you have to take care of people's real safety. You have to actually clean things and, you know, put up the proper barriers and things like that. And but also people have to feel safe, you know, like what are you doing to communicate to them that you're doing those things? Yeah. And so I think, you know, both companies with their employees and with their customers, they have to really think about, you know, what are we doing? And then also what do they know we're doing? Because it doesn't really it doesn't bring a lot of psychological safety for them if they don't know that you're doing it. So yeah, that's something probably on everyone's mind almost no matter where we go right now.
Safety seems like a no-brainer. I know the second part of your formula that we talked about in the previous video was around the lack of like clear data or information we have right now to make decisions, and how that's probably impeding how people are interacting with all kinds of things at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of just uncertainty about, you know, what sources of information can we trust? How accurate even, you know, are people's best laid information? Is it accurate? There's a lot we don't know about this virus. There's a lot companies don't know going forward. So it creates a sense of uncertainty, and people don't really do very well psychologically with a sense of uncertainty. It makes us feel like we don't have control over the situation, which we react negatively to. Is that something that you're seeing happening in customer space?
Well, I think, you know, when I fall back on that idea that customers are human beings first, if it's happening to employees, it's happening to customers, because they're really the same people, you know, different context. Right. And so we have to pretty much assume that is happening. What I think is interesting is, what does that mean then? If you know customers are struggling with, I know a phrase you and I have talked about with cognitive load. I've got all this information coming at me, and it's conflicting, and one piece of information seems reliable one day, and the next it's contradicted by something else that seems reliable. Is that makes it harder for me to make decisions. And one of the things I might fall back on is what we talked about, the affect heuristic, which is where I sort of go with my gut instead. I let emotion drive that. If that's true, it feels to me like the recommendation to brands right now is you're going to have to really rethink your messaging strategy. Whatever you had planned, you know, 90 days ago for this period is out the window at this point. If consumers are experiencing heavy cognitive load with a lot of information, then the antidote to that is simplicity in your messaging. You need very simple, declarative. I'm even thinking in terms of like short messaging. It gets right to the point. That doesn't use a lot of marketing speak. So I don't have to wade through all that, because I probably don't have the patience for it. at the
Yeah.
moment. Maybe I never had the patience, but I have less
Right.
for it now
Yeah.
than normally. I also think if the affect heuristic really is kicking in right now, then emotion-based messaging or appeal to emotion, or at least understanding that consumers are in an emotional state, is really critical. I oftentimes advise companies in terms of loyalty to try to stay away from mercenary-based messaging. The messaging is all about price, and it's all about discounts, because that really is maybe the most basic way to engage a consumer, but it doesn't actually build long-term loyalty with them. And so if you can move more into emotion-based language, particularly messages that are about serving, not selling right now, I think you're going to be in a better place with the consumer just because of where their mindset is right now.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that was kind of the next, or the when we talked about employees, the last thing that we talked about was like kind of feeling maybe unappreciated for everything that they're bringing to the table, everything they're being asked to do and sacrifice on the fly. Speaking as a customer myself, I feel like I'm getting tons of offers from companies. You know, everyone's having a sale, everyone wants my business, everyone's grateful that I'm buying things from them. So in a way, I feel like as a customer, I'm more appreciated than ever. So I don't know if that's something that you see as being different in the customer space compared to the employee.
I would say maybe to that. Certainly people like a lower price, but right now the tendency, I think, would be, if that's the messaging you're delivering, if your simple declarative messaging is lower price, come buy from me right now, that will more likely translate to the customer right now as being about you, not about them. Because it's really, you're trying to sell, you're trying to move inventory, and everybody knows businesses are struggling right now. But what customers know is they're struggling too. So what you're trying to do is get past that mercenary level of interaction to something more meaningful. You're going to be better off with language that is service-based. Like, how do I make your life easier? In a loyalty program context, that means most likely taking away punitive restrictions that you have in the program, penalties that people have for cancellations or for not paying a fee on time. It might mean extending point expiration. Points were supposed to expire this year. Maybe they should expire next year. So it's moving past that language of selling into serving. And frankly, to me, what that really comes down to at the end is, can you move your focus during this period to being about values? And we talked about that with employees, that now is a great time for a company to talk to employees about purpose. I'd say the corollary with customers is talk about values, shared values that you have as a company that you know reflect in the way your customers look at the world. This is something we oftentimes refer to as cult loyalty. It's loyalties at the value level, because that's really hard to break. But it's also a message that may resonate now more than ever, that sense of being connected around a higher purpose. And I'll give a great example where I kind of referenced this earlier, where I think we're seeing that happening at the moment. When you think about the number of small businesses that are being supported right now by people who are going out of their way to try to keep restaurants alive. I know people are paying their hairdresser, even though they can't get a haircut right now, to help them stay in business. Those are values-based choices. I could just not pay you, or I could just go where it's cheaper.
Right.
But we're making decisions to say, for instance, we believe small business is important to the economy, and therefore I will make the extra effort. So major brands should get in that same space. They should be looking for ways to connect at that level with a customer, saying, you know, I'll make the extra effort if I feel like you're making the extra effort around your values.
Yeah, because that cult loyalty is much like stickier, you know, when
Right.
competition comes along or your product struggles or whatever, you know, people are more likely to remain loyal when you have that cult relationship with them than the transactional, which is like, well, I'm just going to pivot over here because they're doing it cheaper. So along the same lines of values, I know we have some data at Merits showing that part of the way that companies express their values is in the way that they treat their employees, and that actually carries over to customer interactions and feelings about the brand. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So we've been doing a pulse survey on a weekly basis during the pandemic of U.S. consumers. And one of the questions, an obvious question we asked them is, the way companies are handling you right now, will that affect your decision to buy from them after the pandemic? And overwhelmingly, the majority of people said yes, absolutely. It will have an impact on that. But the much more interesting piece of data, I think, that's in that survey is when we ask the same question about employees. How companies treat their employees, will that affect who I continue to do business with after the pandemic? And we had an even stronger positive response to that question. So to me, that gets back to this whole issue of, are you really connecting at a values level? Because if I think about employees and how they're treated as a consumer, I think, well, if you're not treating your employees well, should I question whether you're treating me well? Or what is your intention with me, right? Those are not separate questions. So if you're thinking about loyalty right now, if you're thinking about connecting to the current mindset of customers, you cannot exclude your employees from that equation, because we're going to be looking at them as if they're closely connected. It seems like that makes sense, that I in my mind would not separate those out completely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that people consciously think of them in that way, like that if you're doing this, then you're probably going to do this to me. But I think so much of psychology and our behavior is driven by kind of implicit cues that we don't even know we're paying attention to. So, it's likely that people see the way that you're treating an employee and they just sort of feel, it just causes them to sort of feel a certain way about you. Like, that's how you treat people. And I'm a person. So that's, how you would probably treat me.
And, I love you saying that, because I think so much of what I've learned from you in our interactions is a lot of this meaningful application of behavior science to the kind of work we do with customers, employees, is not always the obvious answer. It's sometimes much more subtle. It's much more behind the scenes, which is why it really requires this more thoughtful approach to determining what's going to be, resonant and what's going to actually, connect through and create a better experience. So I appreciate us having this conversation today. I appreciate you joining us in this conversation. If you only saw this part, please go and look at and view part 1, where we talk about similar ideas, but very specifically around employees. And we encourage you to continue to think about these ideas and how behavior science can really become more part of how you meaningfully connect with employees and with customers as we move forward during this challenging period.